So this has always been Courthouse Square. In 1866, lumber was hauled from Boonesboro to Algona to build the very first courthouse in Kasuth County. The building cost $800 and was completed by January 1 of 1867. It was used for 5 years, and then it was moved across the street to the west and became a paint shop after that. And I don't know what happened to it after that. But this is the cornerstone of the second courthouse, and it was laid in 1872. And I noticed, I guess I hadn't looked at it for a while, but I see they have it supported with metal. It looks like it's getting pretty fragile. So the structure, the second courthouse structure had a 72-foot tower, and it cost approximately $40,000, and it stood for 82 years. And now the present courthouse is a modern brick building which was dedicated in 1955. It cost $500,000 to build. And Harley did a comparison of the costs. The first building was $800. It was used for 5 years, so that was $160 a year. The second courthouse was $40,000 and stood for 82 years, so it was $482 a year. And this one cost $500,000, so we're at $7,143 per year. And when it's 500 years old, it'll be $1,000 a year. So anyway, we'll keep moving down to the corner here then. So the street there is North Thorington Street, and it was once the main street coming into Algona from the north. Doctors, lawyers, bankers, and business owners later preferred it as a convenient walk to their downtown offices. It was nicknamed the Silk Stocking Street, or the richest street in town. Through the many years of many of the stately homes have been destroyed by fires, and then the Depression hit the economy hard, and after World War II, the need for housing turned many of the stately homes into boarding houses. Thorington Street was named after James Thorington, who was a lawyer, congressman, and diplomat. He spent 2 years traveling the frontier, trading and trapping, and was 6 months in the company of the legendary Kit Carson. In 1854, Thorington was elected to Congress in the anti-slavery Whig Party. Shortly after, the new legislature joined the like-minded anti-slavery Republican Party. This made Thorington the first Republican congressman from Iowa. And he wasn't actually from here, but he was greatly admired by the cause. And his greatest achievement was the passage of the Iowa Land Grant Bill, which placed 4 million acres of federal land was given to the state as an incentive for railroad development. And this helped Iowa develop east to west trunk lines. But many Iowans resented these grants, especially in towns that were not the beneficiaries of the new lines. So this is the Call City Park. And this is where Asa Cyrus Call built his cabin in 1855. He had brought his bride, Sarah Heckert Call, to the area in November of 1854, and they had lived with his brother Ambrose in his cabin, which is now A.A. Call State Park. And remember, they were newlyweds, and they were living in their brother's cabin, which was 12 by 12. Yeah. A lot of privacy there. I heard that Ambrose went on a lot of hunting trips that winter. Okay, they built their cabin here the following spring, and Sarah was given the privilege of naming the town, and she chose Algona. As the town grew, so did their family, with 7 children in all. They built a wooden 2-story home on this plot to replace the cabin, and then in 1884, Asa built a grand house on this location, and it costed $8,000, which was a goodly sum in those days. Asa's property once extended to the north and east where the 2 houses there currently sit. And he actually owned all of this clear over past Jones Street, if you're familiar where the highway is. And that was all farm. He turned that into farm ground at one point, and then it gradually developed into the city. So. And this house, the same year that his father constructed his house across the street, Asa Frank Call built this house for $5,500. These were probably the first grand homes in Algona. The house originally had a large front porch and featured 5 bedrooms and a beautiful mahogany staircase. Mr. F.E. Smith purchased the house in 1889 and resold it 4 years later to to Theodore Chrysillus, and he actually pronounced that Theodore, because that from Germany, that's how they, and so he was commonly known as Theo. His son Julius, who returned here from Minneapolis to take over managing the family store, actually lived in this house. And then you'll hear about the next house that was also Chrysillus's. Theo's grandson Theodore Chrysillus added a small addition to the west to give a home to a faithful cleaning lady. And then the house was sold in 1945 and made into apartments, and that is what it serves as today, as an apartment house. All right, so this is known as the Chrysillus Cottage. Theo rode the inaugural Milwaukee and St. Paul train ride into Algona on August 13, 1870, and shortly thereafter opened a general mercantile store on the same block where the Call Opera House later stood, which is right across the street from the courthouse. His first house was on the corner where the water plant stands. Just 2 years after buying the house next door for his son, Theo and his wife Elise built this house in 1895, and it is thought to be the first house in Algona designed by an architect. It uses shingle siding and American style used late in the 19th century. There was a large porch that later was enclosed as a sunroom, which is right there. It also had a summer kitchen in the back where the cook stove was moved to keep the house cool as food was prepared in the summer. Theo's namesake and grandson, Theodore, ran the Chrysillus store, succeeding his father, Julius. And he, after his grandfather died, Theodore, the grandson, actually lived in this house. And Theodore ran the Chrysillus store, succeeding his father, Julius. And then his sons, Ted and Jack, owned the store until their retirement in 1990. Okay, this house is an Italianate style, as you can see by the arched bricks over the windows and doors. This style was popular in the U.S. from 1800 to 1890. Napoleon Benham built this house for his wife after returning from the Civil War. He had survived a gunshot, but 8 years later died from blood poisoning from the lead remaining in his body. His wife sold the house to E.V. Sweeting, an attorney, and then the house was later the Vera Apartments. Some of you may remember that. There's Anne, a picture. And then Anne Clark made her home in the basement and was known as an excellent seamstress and made many wedding dresses. It is currently a single-family home.
And this is an early picture. We got it from Algona Publishing. And you can see the porch actually had a balcony above.
Oh, goodness.
Which I asked Harley to put back on, but he won't do it. I don't know why. But I'm sure like scatter rugs and stuff. Are they the ones that will hang about that? Yeah. And there's a sidewalk in front. And I actually have an older picture where it's boards. And so they're just starting to, kind of getting established. But you can go around. And how you actually put
I'm not sure. They were thinking about
yeah. And all of that on the back is Aunt Kate, which I don't know who Aunt Kate is.
That is cool. That is pretty cool. That's really cool.
But just by their dresses, it's pretty essential.
Right over there.
It's needed better things. I love those studs. Yeah. Are they still there?
They're underneath the porch.
Oh, okay. That's cool.
Yeah. He's not going to dig those out either. I had so many.
He just won't cooperate, will he?
I know. He won't cooperate on anything.
And the Sweetings had the honor of having a street named after them. It's a one-block street. But there used to be an East Sweeting Street, which was one block that way, but obviously that was closed down and later on. So we're going to keep moving.
To call it
Thanks,
sweating.
Obviously, the original house is no longer here, but this was the original site of the David and Susie Haggard house.
Oh.
David was just a teenager when he assisted his father, one of the original surveyors of Cassup County, in 1854. And after fighting the Civil War, David returned to Algona in 1881. He even served as mayor of Algona in 1886. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Haggard Too Good Charitable Trust. They fund many of the fine art projects, historical preservation projects. They're just a godsend to our community. That was established by David and Susie's granddaughters, Barbara Haggard and Eleanor Haggard Too Good. So what a blessing they've been to our community. So.
We had a Voices from the Past on them at the cemetery one year, and that was really interesting.
Yeah. I think that was the very first year.
Yes,
I think we did the Haggards.
that was a good one.
Yeah. So this was the house of Maddie and Al Falkenhanger. Maddie was the only daughter of David and Susie Haggard, and so naturally she wanted to live next door to Mom and Dad. And her husband was the founder of Pharmacists Mutual. He purchased the lot by trading farm ground for it. Maddie was one of the organizers of the League of Women Voters in Algona. They employed cooking and cleaning help and gardened as many of the other homes did at the time. And the fourth square classic style home was built in 1910. And a large porch originally fronted the house before it was remodeled. And then obviously the garage was added then too. So. This is 503 North Thorington, and it's a Carpenter Gothic cottage, and it is actually one of the oldest residences in Algona. The west portion of the house, as well as the kitchen on the back side, date back to the Civil War, and the front was added in 1900. Charlie Murtaugh, politician and president of the Security State Bank, purchased the house in 1912. And he is the brother of Ed Murtaugh, who lived just down the street, and we're going to hear about him a little later too. Max Herbst, who was a partner in the Crucilla's Herbst store, owned this Italianate style home in 1900. There was a tennis court in the back, and I want you to notice the beautifully restored porch. Many of the porches are missing on these houses. It's lovely. Craftsman style, built in 1913 for Jesse and Rhonda Bonar. Jesse was a lawyer and maintained an office in his home. He served as Algona City Attorney for several years. The house originally featured a porch on the north side and recently has had a pergola added. And some of you may remember, they only had one child, that was Bonnie Bradford, who used to be a director of nursing at Good Sam. Some of you may remember her or not. Okay, this arts and crafts style house shows the need for simpler lifestyle with smaller spaces that could be maintained without servants. Dr. Robert Wallace and his wife built this house. The deep porches and details of the Victorian era were no longer popular. New materials like the glass block wall on the south side are now being used. And note the sunrise built in above the door. I was actually in the house once when Marie Penton owned it.
Yeah. Penton, gorgeous.
Yeah, the glass block, I happened to be there in the morning. Okay, so Peter Purvis came from Scotland and built his Carpenter Gothic house in 1885. He came from many generations of farmers, but he apprenticed with a carpenter for 4 years and learned the trade. He built many houses and craft pieces in Algona. He even built the pulpit for the Congregational Church. The house once stood on 3 acres of land and contained an orchard and extensive gardens, both of flowers and vegetables. The house was later owned by the Purvis children and their spouses, one of whom was Edward, I believe it's pronounced Haug, because the former sledding hill south of the house, before the house was built, was a popular, I lived in the neighborhood, it was a popular place, and it was known as Haug's Hill. So I just noticed all the intricate work. I mean, it was all hand done back then. Trees feel so good.
It does.
The Algona Upper Des Moines, May 16, 1900 issue stated, the Ehlers House is a cottage home after the style of Theo Crucilla's cottage. And you'll see a lot of the same lines in this house. The home is 38 by 46 feet and featuring a very large and handsome porch. In 1886, William Ehlers bought the Dingley Pharmacy in partnership with Otto Falconer. Ehlers was from New York and was experienced in hardware, and Falconer had worked for Dingley and was well liked by the community. So they built houses next to each other, and you'll notice how close they were. They were great friends, and so they built their houses very close to each other. Let's see, Ehlers' construction cost for this house was $3,000. And in 1908, Ehlers sold the home to Joe Misbach, proprietor of the Kraft and Misbach clothing store, for $36.50, which was a bargain price, and then he moved to Milwaukee. Joe married Edna McIntyre and had two sons, Leighton and Lawrence, and a daughter, Catherine. And Leighton Misbach went on to be a mayor of Algona. And I knew the house. I used to work for the Hutchison Buchanan firm, and Don Hutchison and his wife Lucille lived in this house for many years. And it's really beautiful on the inside as well.
I like that porch.
Yeah,
That wrap on.
yeah, isn't that cool the way? Yeah. So we'll just kind of stay here and we'll talk. I'm sorry.
Got a pool.
It has a pool in the back.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll talk about this house then next door. In 1886, the land was owned by Otto Falconer, a chemist that worked in the Dingley Drug Store downtown. In 1900, he and his wife Anna built a house. And you'll notice the rock wall that's in front here. That was built of stones removed from the street when it was first constructed. So it's kind of like our farm. The rocks are always coming to the top. That's right. His daughter, Helen Falconer Pletch, and her husband Frank lived in the same house for many years. And at the end of the Depression, the upstairs was converted into an apartment with its own utilities, and the stairs were moved to the front foyer. However, when it became a one-family residence again, the stairs were moved back to their original location, and the second set of utilities were removed. So it's back to a single-family residence. We're going to go down to the corner now to the Murtaugh's before that owned the house down there. This house was built in 1915 for Ed and Marie Murtaugh. The house has a hardwood floored ballroom on the third floor. Ed Murtaugh was the owner of the County Savings Bank, which was located on State Street. And that's, if you know where Bill Farnham's office was, that was the bank, and Bill owns the house, so he had both rooms. The marble that was used in the house is the same as what was used in the bank. The grounds included a tennis court and extensive gardens to the east that Marie Murtaugh tended. When Ed lost his bank in the Depression and then later died in 1936, Marie was able to keep the house until 1945 by taking boarders. The boarders were usually teachers and other young professionals. So, I don't know how many of you know Bob Beekman, but this was a house built by his parents. And it was built in 1946, and when Bob returned from the war, he helped his dad build the house. So it's not one of the oldest houses, but it sure is cute.
It is.
Yeah, yeah. And you have to remember, most of these houses came later because when they had a big house, they owned lots of acres, and most people had a barn for their horse and their cow and whatever, the buggies and all the stuff they had. So, yeah, so a lot of these were huge lots. So Will Haggard had this English Tudor style built in 1937. The house is featured in an architectural magazine and in a book. And the roof of this section of the house is carried so low that the windows are treated as wall dormers. Haggard was the publisher of the Algona Republican newspaper. A bachelor most of his life, he married his housekeeper, Seabird, very late in life. And they are buried together at Riverview Cemetery. And I'm thinking they might be a good candidate for the cemetery watch. This is a Greek Revival Federal-style house, and it was built in 1920 and has many characteristics of the early 20th century architecture. The iconic style of columns in front and square shape of the house are characteristic of the Greek Revival style. The house still has the original woodwork and hardwood floors. The two-car garage was added in 1980. Melzer and Duffy Haggard were the original owners of this house and lived here until 1965. And then their daughter Barbara lived here until 1978. And then you may remember Denny and Mary Waller, who were they lived here while he was the editor of the Algona Upper Des Moines newspaper. We're going to go down to Josh's next.
Come grab some refreshments.
What are you doing here first?
Well, we were just down here to the show.
We were talking about your house.
You didn't talk about my house. Yeah, how's Bill doing?
In 1888, this Carpenter Gothic house was built by J.F. Nicholson, who was a popular local photographer in the turn of the century. Joe quickly built a photography. He had a camera that would produce an 18 by 22 inch life-size photo, and he had studied the art of retouching. This made his business widely used for wedding parties, infants, and families. And if you have a photo from that era, look for the Nicholson logo. Joe was quite handsome and married the beautiful Isabella, who had long black hair. They were wonderful dancers and would go to Irvington by horse and carriage at 3 p.m. to dance and eat supper. The dance would last all night. Nicholson's moved to California in 1920, and the house was first rented and then purchased by the McEnroe family. Patricia McEnroe was remembered for playing and teaching lessons on her baby grand piano in the bay window area of the house.
And we've done some modifications since.
Louis McEnroe's sister.
This is the put on red
I think so.
Everybody
agree with that?
basics. On this pillar, you can see we've had to replace some of the wood on the base to keep everything even. So Rushers came to help us with that. And then beyond the bay window that has where the baby grand was at, we now have a full sunroom back there. So we've modernized. It's a 4 seasons glass roof sunroom. During summer you have to put a shade on it because it gets too hot. So we put a little shade on the side. But yeah, we kind of modernized it a little bit, but it's still got all the characteristics in the house. There's a light that pulls down that used to be a candle in there. We got this red light in here, which is kind of cool. Turn it on.
Oh, beautiful.
Light the candle. So there's some cool things.
Thank you.
And then we came up with a glass to etch on there, but it was similar to what they originally had, but added our own little characteristics. Margie added her, style to it a little bit.
Are you a graphic designer?
Yeah, I'm a graphic designer.
Yeah, so it's very talented.
What's interesting that you'll notice in some of these homes is they were kind of a little bit in between styles. So you've got like Victorian, decorations on the house, but then you've also got some like Art Deco elements. So like down here, that's Art Deco on the bottom of the door. So they were kind of like changing over the styles a little bit, but somehow they incorporated both together. So it's kind of interesting if you look, you can see the two combined.
This home was built in 1920 and is a Greek Revival Federal-style house. The more simplistic design and the boxiness is in response to the Victorian-era excesses. The columns at the front door are Greek Revival, and the Federal influence is in the curved pediment over the front door. The house has beautiful built-in woodwork inside and a very nice sun porch on the side. So this again is obviously not the original house, but we call this site the Wedding Gift House site. And this is the site where Dr. Frank and Mrs. Valley Tribben built their house in 1889. The house was just nearing completion when the couple got married and it was a gift from him to her. And they were married outdoors in West Bend at the home of her parents. Their wedding night at the State Street Hotel was interrupted when Dr. Frank had to deliver his sister's baby, and Valley spent the night alone. The couple had 5 children, including a set of twins. In 1917 and 18, when the Spanish flu epidemic was going on, he worked night and day. Their daughter Ruth was married in the house, and the house is very similar to the house that's next door. And she was married in the house, and it was filled with yellow chrysanthemums and ferns. And then 2 days before their 50th wedding anniversary, Dr. Tribbin died at age 84. And Valley kept the house until she passed in 1955. But they were kind of sister houses. The design was very similar to the house that's next door. This Victorian house features an oak foyer, an oak winding staircase, a parlor with a fireplace, and maid quarters with separate staircase to the kitchen. Richard Palmer worked for the railroad and built this house. During the Depression, it became a boarding house, and postal workers from the Milwaukee would walk up the hill to stay here. Some of you may remember the Palmer family.
The bedrooms upstairs have numbers above the doors.
Yeah,
1,
for the
2,
board.
3, 4.
Yeah. And I don't believe that there's anybody.
There hasn't been anybody.
Yeah. I think
What's the
there's
story?
some
Why did the band?
This is a sandstone block exterior house, and it has a plaster interior, and it's almost identical to one on Main Street in Burt. And some of the windows have beveled glass. And previously it had a wraparound porch on the front. You can kind of see the curve of the house. It had a wraparound porch. There is someone living here.
The awning was.
Hopefully it'll be restored someday. So and with that, that's the end. So you got 5 minutes to get to the
You
parade.
did a great job. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Really did a
Thank
great
you.
job.